Edwards needs some space. Edwards, top three, cash!
He can hoop a little bit, huh? Just a little bit, huh?
Y'all better stand down. The truth.
It's been 2 years since members of the NBA community crowned Anthony Edwards as the next Michael Jordan, following in the glamorous footsteps of people ranging from Harold Miner to Dwayne Wade. How does Ant's game mirror theirs? How has he mimicked Jordan's apolitical legacy? How good is Ant right now? And how good could he possibly become?
And only had one shot attempt in that first half. Another turnover for Utah. Edwards gets it back! And threw it down! And one from the rafters!
Let's start with what makes Ant such a special player, his scoring. First, his raw numbers. 29.6 points per game and 29.9 points per 75 on 61.7% true shooting. He's third in the league in points per game but drops to 10th in points per 75. This scoring prowess is driven by his newly completed 3-level scoring. In the short mid-range, he jumped from 3.5 to 4.3 attempts per 75, a leap from being in the 76th percentile in shots from that range to an elite 92nd percentile, while also increasing his efficiency from that range, going from 41.9% last year to 46.3% this year, which represents a percentile leap from 45th to 74th percentile. Along with that, his long mid-range attempts have increased from 2.2 to 3.1 attempts per 75 from the 89th percentile to the 96th, while going from 35.5% from that distance to 46.2%. It's hard not to understate the leap in in-between scoring. Let's take a look at two examples here. Dort can't back up too far because of the threat of Ant's shooting. However, at the same time, Ant's rim pressure is too much of a threat once he gets to the in-between area, so he's able to use that advantage to create a relatively open mid-range shot. Here's another case where he uses his rim scoring to unlock that short mid-range. Adding this dimension to his game amplifies his scoring opportunities. Along with that boosted midi, Ant has buffed his rim attempts from 4.6 per 75 to 4.9 this season, which may not seem like much, but is the difference between an 86th percentile rim attacker and a 94th percentile one. He's also somehow remarkably increased his efficiency in that area, going from 63.3% in 2025 to 70.5% this year, a huge jump from 53rd percentile to 79th. However, it's worth noting that his drives per game has dropped from 13.2 last season to 11.6 this year. Thus, it's likely that his rim pressure has not actually jumped an incredible amount, but the phenomenal efficiency from that area still gives me reason to believe that he is a better rim scorer this year. His combination of vertical explosiveness and balance lets him pull off some truly jaw-dropping finishes. Look at how he just goes over and around defenders in the air. However, at the same time, he's not great at drawing fouls from these rim attempts. He's taking 7.2 free throw attempts per 75, which ranks in the 99th percentile. However, to truly get a better metric on his foul drawing, we're pulling up the Crafted NBA Scouting Report, a datasheet of how good a player has been over the last 2 years with a greater emphasis on the current season. Using this, we can see that free throw rate, which measures how many free throws you're taking relative to shots you take, only ranks Ant in the 82nd percentile. While still good, he's not one of those all-time great foul drawers like Jordan or Wade were. Make up for the free throws, Ant takes much more threes than either of them did. However, this year has led to a slight regression in three-point volume, which has fallen from its 97th percentile of 10.5 attempts per 75 in 2025 to a relatively low 8.6 shots this year. While this still remains a 90th percentile mark in three-point volume, and he has kept his percentage relatively stable, shooting at 39.9% from that range compared to 39.5% last year. His three-point attempt rate is at 41.1% this year in comparison to a 50.5% rate last year. This represents a pretty considerable change in his shot diet, which may raise questions, although Crafted NBA still tracks his shot quality in the 88th percentile over the last 2 seasons. All this combined gives Ant an incredibly proficient scoring profile for this season. The true shot attempt stat is meant to track how many shots a player is putting up, taking free throws into account. Ant is taking the most shots of anyone in the league this season at 32 true shots per 100 possessions while maintaining his elite efficiency. As a creator, he's taking 16.2 true shot attempts per 100 possessions, having a true shooting mark of 57.2% on those self-created shots, or 4.2% above league average. The burst and threat of scoring from any area has truly made him a well-rounded, resilient shot creator. Then, Let's talk about how Ant breaks down his scoring portfolio and how he uses his 3-level scoring to influence possessions. We'll start with the on-ball elements first. Looking at the NBA's tracking data, 23.5% of Ant's possessions come as the pick-and-roll ball handler, where his teams convert at a rate of 1.02 points per possession, or at 86.6th percentile among handlers. In his isolation possessions, making up 24.1% of his diet, and converts at 1.06 points per possession, an 81.7th percentile rate of isolation players. So far, it seems like all of this is just up to par, right? We all know Ant is a great scorer when he has the ball in his hands, but how does everything else come together? He's relatively unremarkable in other areas. In transition at 15.1% frequency, he finishes with 1.27 points per possession, a 78.2 percentile mark. Post-ups at 5.2% frequency are only 1.08 points per possession at 65.3 percentile. Handoffs are 7.3% usage, also being at 1.08 points per possession, but at a 74.9 percentile this time. Off screens, Ant's looking at a 4.6% frequency and a 1.14 points per possession, or 78.9 percentile. His weakest parts of his game are cuts, where he's at a 1.6% frequency and at 1.21 points per possession, 31.7 percentile. And miscellaneous possessions, which represent 4.1% of Ant's possession resume and only convert at 0.46 points per possession, big 42.2 percentile. However, there's one area that we haven't covered yet. Yeah, Ant's an amazing ball handler and scorer. Yes, he's relatively unremarkable in the other areas covered. But what if I told you that Ant is even more devastating when he's found off ball than when he has the ball in his hands? In spot ups, with a 12.7% frequency, Ant is converting at a blistering 1.34 points per possession at the 96.6th percentile in the league. That's absolutely ridiculous. His effective field goal percentage on catch and shoot attempts at about 2.6 per game is at 75.4%. He's shooting 52.8% from 3 on those shots. If he can improve his volume and get more active in looking for those off-ball looks, his scoring potential is limitless. We're looking at a relatively resilient, unschemable scorer. He's shooting 57.1% from 2 and 42.1% from 3 in the clutch. He's probably leading the race for Clutch Player of the Year right now. To add to that, let me just rattle off some playoff scoring numbers we have for Ant. We measure volume scoring in the playoffs relative to the level of competition. Inflation-adjusted points per 75 is a metric that inflates or deflates how much you score depending on the defensive rating of the team played against versus the league average at the time. We also use relative true shooting to determine how efficient someone scores compared to the league average in that period. Overall, Ant is averaging 25.8 inflation-adjusted points per 75 on plus 1.6% relative true shooting over his 45-game playoff sample. This is a great volume scorer on good efficiency. In comparison to some other notable scorers and MJ apprentices, Ant seems to hold up. Kobe was looking at 23.2 inflation-adjusted points per 75 and plus 0.63% relative true shooting over his first 4 seasons and 50 games of a playoff sample. Over D. Wade's first 4 seasons, a 54-game sample, he's at 27.61 inflation-adjusted points per 75 on plus 4.15% relative true shooting. In Vince's case, over his 4 seasons of 30 games, he had 29.33 inflation-adjusted points per 75 on plus 1.57% relative true shooting. In other words, Ant's projecting and performing well as a playoff scorer. Oh, and if you're wondering, over Jordan's first 4 playoff performances, a 20-game sample, he's averaging a pretty normal 34.89 inflation-adjusted points per 75 on plus 5.68% relative true shooting. No matter which way you look at it, Ant deserves to be in these conversations so far. But then, if he's this good at putting the ball in the basket, where does Ant give up value, and what stops him from being in the MVP conversations? Let's start off with the playmaking. While his potential assists look good with a 68th percentile rate of 8.8 potential assists per 100 possessions, this is significantly boosted by his 98th percentile 33.9% on-ball rate. His potential assists per minute is at 1.1 or the first percentile. When we use more advanced stats to quantify how efficient his playmaking is, this is more pronounced. Assist effective field goal percentage is a measure of your teammates' efficiency on shots on your potential assists. And in this category, Ant has an unimpressive 48th percentile score. Additionally, when tracking his bad pass turnover percentage, which shows how often you turn the ball over on a bad pass compared to your potential assists, Ant has an absolutely abysmal percent of 17.2% in the 18th percentile. He gives up a ton of value in this area, and as much aura as you can say he gets from refusing to pass and then chucking up a shot, it significantly harms his offensive ceiling. Looking at some of these playmaking opportunities, you'll see that Ant is able to make easy reads, such as in the pick and roll. His balance also allows him to pull off incredible mid-air passes. However, he misses a lot of these reads and relies on his scoring. Look at Gobert calling for the ball here before Ant forces the doubled fade. Ant's playmaking remains reactive, not proactive. This isn't to knock Ant's offense at all. In all impact metrics, his offense still looks absolutely pristine. Again, let's take a look at Crafted NBA scouting report. Their all-in-one offensive metric, Crafted OPM, has Ant in the 98th percentile, representative of his immense abilities and gravity as a scorer. Crafted estimates the amount of open shots he creates for teammates in the 90th percentile while having a 93rd percentile offensive load, which approximates the amount of team offense that relies on one player. However, going back to those passing woes, Crafted OPM's measure of a player's passing quality only holds Ant in the 58th percentile, which stops him from being one of those all-time offensive legends. It might be a little that Ant is more unwilling than most to pass the ball, but also that Ant often doesn't make the reads that great playmakers would. His talent for scoring makes up for a lot of these deficiencies, but it can't mask everything. He doesn't need to become a Steve Nash, but he needs to be able to leverage his scoring gravity as much as possible to boost his teammates' scoring. Ant's otherworldly scoring being held back by his playmaking is shown through his impact metrics on this side of the ball. He's at a plus 5.7 offensive on-off and a plus 4.2 team relative offensive rating when Ant is on the floor. When he's on the court, his team is 1.8% more efficient and turnovers decrease by 1.2%. Team shoots 5.3% better at the rim, 0.9% better in the mid-range area, and 1.7% better from 3. But everything you're saying makes him look like an offensive positive, right? Katie, you just want to drag this young man down. However, going back to that question about his tyranny of usage, much of the change in efficiency is because you're getting Ant shooting the ball instead of one of those other players on his team. He's still not creating the best opportunities for his teammates to be a legitimately all-time great offensive engine out there. Let's take a look back at some of the MJ clones for reference. Anthony Edwards is currently in his 6th season at the age of 24. In 2006, D-Wade boosted the Heat offense by 14.7 points to a 6.7 offensive relative rating, a true shooting by 5%, and lowered turnovers by 2.1% in his year 3 season at age 24. In his 7th season at 24, Kobe increased the team's offensive rating by 10.6 to a plus 5 relative team offense, increased true shooting by 1.6%, and lowered turnovers by 3.4%. For Ant to get these all-time great swings in offensive rating, getting better at the playmaking aspect of the game is absolutely imperative. The problem is that Ant's defense might be more worrying. It hasn't been a huge problem for the Wolves so far, as they still post a defense 0.7 points better than league average when he's on the court. However, Ant has one of the best regular season one-man defenses ever anchoring him. When Ant is on the court without Gobert in 536 minutes, the Wolves are 5.1 points worse than league average on defense. Overall, this means that Ant's defensive on-off swing is a shocking plus 5.9, and looking at an all-in-one metric, a defensive RAPM of -1. While this is not completely Ant's fault, it's not a particularly beneficial signal for his defensive impact. Even looking at individual numbers, it's not that much better. He's actually a pretty good player in some categories, averaging 2.9 stocks per 100 and maintaining a 99th percentile foul rate. However, there's a lot of huge places where Ant does not look great at all that lower my opinion on his defense. Ant generally is not supposed to be tasked with guarding the best offensive player. There are moments where his motor revs up, his athleticism kicks in, and you get these huge highlight plays where he completely locks down a superstar. However, his motor does not always operate at that level, and he will likely continue with his gigantic offensive load, so the Wolves try to hide him on defense. This is represented in his 20th percentile rate in defensive field goal attempts, where he causes no difference in their shooting. You also see his lack of motor in his 19th percentile rate of drawing offensive fouls, 45th percentile rate of forcing turnovers, and 29th percentile rate of deflections. Most all-in-one metrics view Ant as a negative defender. Darko and RAPM both have him as a negative, and the on-off obviously supports this. He's a supremely talented athlete who can turn it up and burst, but he will not often guard a significantly impactful offensive player, and his motor and off-ball feel are often caught lacking. Let's look at that play again, where Kamara is able to easily cut behind Ant because Ant is too busy ball watching. This leads to an easy rim attempt and efficient offense for the Blazers. So how high can I get on Ant? How low can I get on him? And where is his ceiling compared to other players we've called the next Jordan? For the purposes of this exercise, this would be how high you could have Ant if you took the most reasonably high evaluation of him versus the lowest version of other players and vice versa. Ant, on my high-end evaluation, ends up in the 8th spot this season. He remains below the top-tier players like SGA, Jokic, and Giannis, and you would have to be ridiculously high on his scoring to put him above players like Wemby, Cade, Steph, or Kawhi. On the low end, Ant falls to 11th. Players like Luka and Embiid leap him, and a low evaluation of Ant puts him below someone like D. Mitch this season. I think the problems outlined with his game make it pretty easy to levy arguments against him. Players like Steph, Cade, Jokic, and Luka have such a gigantic gap against Ant on playmaking, and Wemby, Giannis, Kawhi, and to a lesser extent Cade and SGA are better than Ant on the defensive side of the ball. His ceiling is much harder to gauge for me. I don't see him blossoming into this great of a shooter, nor did I see his mid-range ascension coming. Like, yeah, let's suspend my disbelief and say he becomes a great playmaker and a great defender too. Then yes, I could see the argument for his ceiling being a MVP level and a GOAT candidate if you truly throw all suspicion about his deficiencies out the window. However, let's try to look at this reasonably. Ant does have some good indicators. He's already a good on-ball defender, and he's made some changes in his playmaking process this season, getting better at passing out of doubles and making easy reads. However, a lot of things he needs to work on have been historically hard to fix. Playmaking relies a lot on feel, which isn't really something that you can make a leap in. I can see Ant making year by year marginal improvements to his passing where he gets good enough that it becomes close enough to impossible to scheme for him in the playoffs. Similarly with the defense, players very rarely have huge leaps in their motor. I don't see him becoming a transformative defender, but similar to Cade or SGA, he could probably become a neutral or slight positive on that end. In a world where Ant's scoring reaches historical territory, becomes a slightly positive defender and a passable playmaker, he definitely becomes a perennial MVP candidate. I mean, the process is obviously different, but that's basically SGA. And yes, that does give him a case against D-Wade and Kobe, but he wouldn't push Mike at all. Where he does push Mike is in his off-court presence. Just as Mike once said, Republicans buy shoes too, so he could avoid speaking out for the rights of African Americans. Ant has said he isn't in tune with the community because he's not on social media. He refuses to acknowledge the fascist overreach of the US state through the arm of ICE that has affected his community, and as much as the game changes, so little outside of it really does.